Last week, I was listening to the Neuro Marvels talk about neurodivergence and religion, and it kind of inspired me to want to share my own story with religion and my own experience as a late diagnosed autistic person. So I'd like to share my story, and please be aware that my comments are set to strict moderation, so if you want to rip me a new one, I probably will never see it unless you make a very civilized argument. And that please always be civilized when you are commenting on other commenters' posts as well. And so it's a beautiful morning here, and I'm sitting here in my house with my French doors open so that I can watch the birds, and I live very close to a lake, so there may be some lake traffic, but also there seems to be a cow in distress across the lake, so occasionally I keep hearing some noise from the cattle, so I apologize if that happens. Also, for any low-flying planes, I'm also near an airport. But I just wanted to talk about my experience with religion. So thanks for the 1,000 subscribers. We'll see how many I have after this. Oh my gosh. I can understand how a lot of autistic people would enjoy the routine, ritual, and rules associated with religion. And I can understand the purpose behind religion being, to comfort people in times in which they need comforting, and, as a means to control behavior. So I understand the purpose behind it, and I understand why people would want to believe in a higher power, something greater than themselves. It didn't work for me. And early on, being an undiagnosed child, the sensory issues were a big problem for me when we were going to this really small church. It had the inset fluorescent lighting in the ceiling, and people kind of crowded together in a small room with lots of scents. People wearing lots of different scents, perfume, cologne, aftershave, and just the scents of other people being kind of overwhelming. And also the preacher was one of those fire and brimstone preachers. And it was always kind of this angry yelling every Sunday, and Sundays were just really stressful for me and apparently my whole family. Tensions seemed to be very high on Sunday, and it had this rushed, stressful feeling, and it seemed like I had probably more meltdowns and more punishments on Sunday than any other day of the week. And I've always had a sensitivity to fabrics, so being stuffed into tights or pantyhose and a little frilly slip and frilly dress, and these layers to go to church, and sometimes with the gloves and a bonnet and everything, it was always really uncomfortable, and the fabrics just made my nerves completely raw, and especially the tights and pantyhose. And Deborah Morgan on Dexter said, has anyone ever died of crotchal asphyxiation? It was really funny, but that's kind of how they feel, not to mention how itchy and scratchy they are. And so being a little person stuffed into this, what amounts to a costume, and being yelled at for an hour, and having to be exposed to, different people maybe wanting a hug, and I didn't like being hugged. And it was always a very stressful thing for me on Sundays. And whenever I was a teenager, we went to a different church with, better lighting, a little bigger, more open space. People were a little more spread out. But the second environment was a little better for me, and the preacher was also more calmly spoken. The message was the same though, and I was always I took everything very literally, and I was very gullible and naive. I believed in Santa Claus until I was 11 years old, and the way I discovered he wasn't real was because my mom told me I could wear a Christmas pin of hers, and I went to get it out of her jewelry drawer and saw Electric Youth perfume in there. And I was a huge fan of Debbie Gibson, so I wanted her Electric Youth perfume for Christmas that year, and had asked Santa for this perfume, which smelled terrible, by the way, and I wasn't able to wear it because sensory issues. But I saw this in the drawer, and I thought, I really had this physical response. My heart was racing, and I had the in my ears, and I'm just like, oh my God, does that mean Santa's not real? Maybe the parents got that for me and they just haven't wrapped it yet. So Christmas morning rolls around, and under the tree is Electric Youth perfume from Santa. So I knew at that moment that it was all a big fat lie. My parents had lied to me and made me believe in this thing that wasn't real. And, I was really sad about it too, because I loved Santa Claus. I thought he was great. And it was a really sad thing for me to experience and made me pretty angry. I didn't confront them though, because for me to confront them would be like me accusing them of lying to me, which they did. But I knew that I'd get in trouble if I accused them of lying, and I thought that I might just get in trouble somehow by somehow finding out that Santa wasn't real. And the worst thing about all of that was finding out Santa wasn't real. That made me realize that my pet rabbit probably didn't run off to help the Easter Bunny either. So there was that. But even though I, found out that this wasn't real, this thing I'd been told to believe in my whole life, I didn't think to make that kind of connection with God and Jesus and religion. And I had very strong faith, and I believed wholeheartedly. And so sometimes I'd like to say I was too smart to believe in any of the Santa Claus stuff or the Tooth Fairy or Easter Bunny. I was always too smart for that. And I never was too smart for any of it. I was always naive and gullible and just believed what I was told. But I still had faith in Christianity. And so I was baptized when I was 14 years old. And I started reading my Bible at that time also. And I read it from Genesis to Revelation. I read it throughout my teenage years. And, Sunday school, Bible study, or whatever, I would have different assignments or whatever to go back and reread different parts. So it was all covered. And I just had lots of questions as I was reading this, and I would ask the leaders of my classes at church lots of questions, and that was not always welcomed. They seemed to perceive it as me questioning authority or being a doubter or trying to stir up trouble even. And I had always loved science. And I kept trying I didn't see why religion and science had to be completely separate things. I thought that science could explain how God pulled off this, creation. And so I would ask things like, well, couldn't God have created the universe through the Big Bang? And couldn't God have used evolution to create life? If there was this being with an infinite lifespan, wouldn't a day for that being be a little longer than a day for us? If he's a universal being, one day could be a rotation of the galaxy around the supermassive black hole instead of, Earth's rotation. It could be very different. And they didn't like me trying to explain religion with science, and or vice versa, anything like that in the Baptist church. So, I liked having evidence. And after the Santa Claus debacle, I really wanted evidence. So I kept looking for it. I kept, reading my Bible, looking for these answers that the church leaders couldn't give me. And I remember one time a boy asking the preacher, "Do you think the end times are near?" And the preacher saying, "I think the end times are closer than ever before." Just very serious with conviction. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, because time doesn't move backwards. And, if that we as humans, we can only experience time moving forward. And from what I've learned, time is linear. So that's how it works. So yes, they would be closer than ever before since we're not moving backwards away from the end of time. And so it was little things like that just kind of made me think, I don't know if this particular branch is the one for me. But I still had faith in Christianity and thought that there was a way to weave that and science together. And so I also had other issues, though, with, I never saw the routine as something that was mine. And so every Sunday, or every Sunday morning and night, and every Wednesday night, and anything in between where there was a youth activity during my teenage years, my routine would be disrupted for church. It wasn't ever a part of my routine. It was something that threw me off of my routine every time the door opened. So there was always that kind of thing of it pulling me out. So I encountered other problems as well. I loved the music that I loved, and fantasy fiction. And so, The Hobbit was my favorite book at the time. And my boyfriend had given me a poster with dragons on it. And one of my friends had given me a wizard necklace. It looked kind of like Gandalf. And I had a nightmare one night, and I thought I could share with one of the adults this nightmare that, had kind of scared me. And I didn't realize how much it would be blown out of proportion. So I told an adult who was a religious zealot. And the next thing you know, I'm being accused of dabbling in witchcraft. And my room is searched, and all of my dabbling in witchcraft paraphernalia was gathered up and burned. And that would include dragon posters and wizard necklaces, things like that, gifts from my friends that meant something, that, had special meaning to me. And, luckily they didn't confiscate my copies of like a Metallica album or anything like that. But they, I didn't have a copy of The Hobbit either for them to burn. So that was really disheartening, that one nightmare could send people into this frenzy. And it just didn't make any sense to me that people could think like that still in the 1990s. So I was, not very happy about that. But I was still praying every night, reading the Bible, and all of that. And so at this point in my life, science is basically where I get my answers. And so sometimes I've heard people say there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, meaning that you pray. Well, my prayers are more like me trying to use the force. And that is how I kind of think of it. When I really want something to happen, it's like I'm trying to use the force to get it to happen. I'm not asking any deity to make it happen. It's more like I'm asking a thing to do the thing. So that is like my boyfriend was fixing my car last weekend, and it was a control arm, and he was having some trouble getting the ball joint in place. And I'm like over there trying to use the force to move this thing into place. He did a way better job with, force in his hammer, actual force, the physics. But that's, the way that I pray these days, and it's totally pointless. I've never been able to use the force successfully. Wish I had. It wasn't helpful for me to do anything otherwise either. I had equal results of trying to use the force and trying to ask God to make something happen for me. So one is equally successful as the other. So anyway, back to the teenage years. I went to college my first year and got a job at the Anglican church singing in their choir, and they were much more open-minded. Whenever I would ask my church leaders about maybe God used evolution to create life, it was not met with any kind of positive reaction. And I said, well, if God wanted to bake a cake, would he use ingredients, or would he just say, poof, there's a cake? I thought at the time that it sounded like perfectly acceptable for God to bake a cake with ingredients, but they didn't like that way of thinking. Everything in the Bible had to be taken very literally. And as an autistic person, I do tend to take things very literally, but having read the Bible, I started to realize that maybe it was just like something that wasn't meant to be taken literally, that there are lessons in there that are good, definitely, but everything isn't meant to be taken literally, perhaps. So I started thinking of it that way. At the Anglican church, science was more accepted, and they had been able to have this balance, it seemed, between religion and science. They didn't, think that science was anything bad. They weren't still living in the dark ages. So I was a little more into that, a little more open to that branch of Christianity. Anglican and Episcopalian seemed to be a little more open-minded, socially conscious, and benevolent to me. I still just, having to go and do something, outside of my routine was still kind of hard on me. So I had a few friends pass away early on, and one of them had been my best friend whenever I was a small child. And when we were in junior high, she moved to a different school and we kind of lost touch. It had some kind of falling out that I don't even know what it was about. And she, she and I had talked the summer before I went to college, and I thought maybe we could get our friendship back on track. But before that could happen, she died in a car accident, and I just went into an existential crisis. I thought there's no way a good, benevolent being could, with the ability to prevent this, would allow that to happen. And if they allowed that to happen as a way to test someone's faith or to teach someone a lesson, then if a person did that, we'd call them a psychopath. Because you don't hurt someone to test their faith or their love. That's just, that's a horrible thing to do. And the more I thought about it, about things, the injustice in the world, and things like war, famine, poverty, plagues, all of the terrible things that happen to people. And I just thought, there can't be any reason for any of this. And so there can't be an intelligent being behind it all. It just didn't make any sense unless that intelligent being was awful. So I just figured that the best explanation was that there wasn't one. That, if there was anything at all, it was just neutral energy. That it was just neutral, chaotic neutral, if you will. That it just is completely indiscriminate, that bad things can happen to anyone for no reason at all. It's just all an accident. So I just started thinking that way. And at first that was really bleak to me, and I was very depressed after my friend died. But her death also made me realize that I didn't have this unlimited time that they tell you, you need to work really hard, and then in retirement you can go and enjoy these things that you always wanted to do. I realized I might not ever live to see retirement, and so I'd better start doing things. And I moved to Montana, and I transferred to a college out there. And while I was there, I studied Native American religion and philosophy. And there was a quote by Black Elk that says, "Peace comes within the hearts of men when they realize their oneness with the universe." I think that's it. That may not be verbatim, but that's really close. And that way of thinking, it really struck a chord with me. And so I started thinking, I've always felt more at peace in nature. Whether it was literal peace, where I could go find peace and quiet in nature with with nature and the animals when, people were angry and yelling, or I could, just be outside feeling the sense of connectedness with everything. And not in a hippy dippy kind of way, but observing nature and how everything works together, and how I'm connected to the earth in the same way, and the sun and everything in the same way in which other animals and the plants are. And I started thinking about it also from the more physical perspective, how my particles have always been here and always will be until the end of the universe. And so they were created, from what I understand. I'm no physicist. My particles were created at the beginning and have been here. in different forms, and they just happen to be occupying this form right now. And when this consciousness is over, I'll move on to something else. May or may not have a consciousness, but I'll be in a different form. Just so life and death, birth and death, it's not a beginning and an end, more than a continuation. And thinking of it that way, that was more comforting to me. Having this perspective that things are more neutral and that I wasn't born awful and bad and evil like I was taught when I was little. Like hearing these things when you're a little person, being told that you're born sinful and you're, even Amazing Grace, it says he saved a wretch like me. So you're thinking I'm sinful and wretched and evil and awful and unworthy of this forgiveness, and an innocent person was crucified for me, and I need to feel guilty and beg for forgiveness every day of my life. That's an awful way to feel when you're a little person. When you're a child and you have that burden thrust upon you, it's very unhealthy. I just felt more of a relief starting to think of things from more of a scientific standpoint. And I also took a Buddhism class, or I signed up for the class and it ended up dropping the class, but I bought all the books and read them. And one of the books was Thich Nhat Hanh. I can't really say it right. I'm sorry. His Heart of Understanding. It was a really good book, and I read it several times. And it talks about interbeing and how we're all connected in some way. Like I'm connected to all the plants and animals that I've consumed that helped to build this form. And the water, the water cycle, I'm connected to the clouds and the rain through the water cycle and things like that, being composed of mostly water. It started making me think this is a much healthier way of thinking for me personally. That's not to say that I can't understand why people would want to believe different things. I studied different religions, and I can see the good things about them, but I also just knew after my experience that I would never go back to organized religion, and that I would just follow my own path, and that is just what I prefer to do. And I don't need any particular life and everything to have any particular meaning. I think that its existence is meaningful enough. Just the fact that it exists is great. And I think Brian Cox says it really in a better way than I could in an interview. If I can find the clip, I might put a link to the video on that. But the gist of it is like, isn't this all amazing enough? Isn't the fact that we exist at all and that life, the earth, the universe exists at all, isn't that amazing enough? Why do you need to give it any kind of meaning? Why does it have to, why does there have to be any meaning behind it all? Isn't it just great? And I kind of think that way. And it's not a cure for depression, and neither is any other form of religion. You can still think a certain way and become depressed. But whenever I have experienced times in my life where I was feeling really down, I didn't have the oppressive guilt on top of everything else. I've experienced more of a sadness and a grief And whenever I was experiencing that, though, like the worst grief was that, of the loss of my dogs, the comfort I found in that was through science and knowing that those particles and that energy, the matter and energy, wasn't spontaneously created with the birth of my dogs. Just like me, like when I was born, this matter and energy wasn't spontaneously created. It had always been. And same with them. And so once they passed, their matter and energy was still with me. It was just in a form that I couldn't see. And I don't need any kind of promise of an afterlife. In fact, the description of heaven sounds pretty awful to me. I've always hated gated communities, and I don't need a mansion. And the singing that goes on, or at least the singing that went on in some of the churches I've been to, was enough to, inspire some earplugs. So I don't think that I would ever be happy in that. And just imagining, like, it sounds like the kind of place where you'd have that guy walking by going, "Get to the cloud district often." Of course you don't. It just didn't seem like the kind of place for me. And if someone tells me you're going to burn in hell, I'm like, well, actually, speaking of hell, she was a Norse goddess, right? She's Loki's daughter. And, if I go to hell, then I guess I'll just that means the Norse were right. And I'll just be chilling there in Helheim, whatever. So, and that doesn't mean I would be burning forever, because that's a different realm. But yeah, any kind of promises of afterlife for me, I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I'd be happy to be just part of the earth for the rest of the earth's lifespan, and then become part of the universe after that, and eventually be sucked into a black hole and maybe become part of another universe inside that black hole. This consciousness doesn't have to remain forever. And, if it comes back together again in another timeline or whatever, that's fine. But I'm not feeling stressed out over whether or not it will. And I'm totally okay with being kind of unimportant and insignificant in the whole grand scheme of things, and being just a tiny little dust particle in the whole universal view. I'm okay with that. And whenever I think about, my dogs, I think there's like that timeline, which I was with them. That timeline always exists. And I've just happened to move out of that timeline. But I'm always with them in that timeline. And I don't understand time and the way it works. And, I don't understand space-time. But that happened, and that's always there. So I think of that, and it gives me comfort. And I think that part of the purpose of religion is to just give people comfort regarding the things that they don't have answers for and can't explain. And, faith doesn't require evidence and all of that. I have had some interesting experiences early on with religion, and science gives me more answers than anything else ever did. So I just have to basically create my own a la carte type thing when it comes to all of that. I still have a moral code. I think Ricky Gervais has a really good little skit about that in that show afterlife. So also, if I can find a clip for that, I will put it in the description below. But I have a moral code. It's not a biblical code, and I don't hold people to the same standards which I hold myself, because that would be like for example, I'm a vegetarian for lots of reasons. Lions aren't vegetarian, but I don't judge them for that. There's so many loopholes sometimes too with the rules in Christianity that I started feeling, the hypocrisy was too much for me. And I realized we can all be hypocrites. But, I can't understand how one of the 10 Commandments could be, thou shalt not kill, when, in the Old Testament, God is killing people left and right. And also that we justify war. We all know what that is. And it's, to me, I just can't justify that. So, especially, anything like that being sanctioned by some supreme deity, that just, that does not sit well with me at all. So, I would prefer to opt out. And that's what I do. I opt out. It seems like anything that is that society has organized, I want to opt out and just fly solo on so many things. But that's just me, and that's my experience, and it doesn't have to apply to anyone else out there. I guess that's all I have to say on that for now.